Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this seminar on industrial parks. Is this a model for sustainable and economically sound industrial development? My name is Saul Levine, and I'm from Trade and Industrial Policy Strategies, or TIPS, and I'll be moderating today's session. We understand the importance of industrial parks. We can see the priority that's been given to industrial policy through government's various policies. We've got the National Industrial Policy Framework, we've got the Industrial Policy Action Plans, and now the Master Plans. All of these things highlight the importance of industrial development and the role of industrial parks in stimulating industry. In the period of post-COVID-19 recovery, we need to think through what does all of this mean for getting industry going, for creating a more dynamic economy. And we've got several panelists on our discussion today, and I'll introduce them shortly. One of the things that we need to think about in terms of our industrial parks is what is the benefit of having an industrial park that looks at clustering or a focus on a particular industry, and what advantages does that offer in terms of being a place where we can see small businesses thriving, linkages for value chains, and other types of support that can be given to enterprises that are located in the industrial park. We've seen globally that industrial parks offer a solution to supporting industrial firms and as a way for economies to get their industry thriving and growing, and has been part of a model that we've seen not only in South Africa and in other countries in Africa working well. We also have an opportunity of linking industrial parks to exports and to other forms of value chains. And these are all things that we'll be exploring in our today's discussion. Importantly, we need to think about what does it mean for cleaner production, and we've got our sponsors of today's session, the NCPC, who will be giving their inputs as to how they see some of these things taking place in a more sustainable way. So it's not just about driving industrialization at all costs, but how do we do it inclusively and how do we do it sustainably? And I'm quite excited to hear their inputs on these important issues. My first speaker today is Bernd Ullemann, and he's coming from the Regional Industrial Development Program in the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. And he's been working on revitalization of industrial parks in South Africa. His work covers strategy, planning, policy compliance, investment promotion, governance, finance, sustainability, as well as monitoring and evaluation, amongst other things. Bernd has worked in the private sector for most of his career, including running his own company. And he's passionate about people living in their original purpose, sustainable development, and important things around economic development. I'll now hand over to Bernd to talk about what the DTRC is doing in this area. Thank you, Bernd.
Thank you very much, Saul. Good afternoon, everyone. I think you'll have to stop me because I get quite passionate about these things. What we've been doing with the Industrial Park Revitalization Program to date, just a quick starter there, the program was initiated in 2015. Since then, we have spent about 750 million odd rands in a number of industrial parks in the country. And what the revitalization program looks at it addresses the needs of the industrial parks through a phased approach. So the first phases, for example, we've looked at security aspects. We've looked at addressing some of the factory roofs. Typical factory environment has roller doors. So we were addressing those. There is not a standard template that we follow because each industrial park is unique. Okay, so what we've done is we sat down with the Development Bank of South Africa, who are assisting us with the implementation of this program. And we also worked with the park management teams. Typically in the industrial parks that we're involved with, these are people that are associated with the provincial development agencies. And together, we identified the core priority areas that needed to be addressed first. Okay, so these are typically the first steps. In one or two of the parks, for example, we started looking at water treatment plants, which typically in our phased approach is something that you would look at later on. The reason why we've done this is because quite a number of the industrial parks that we are active in have not received sufficient support, maintenance over the past 10, 15, 20 years. Okay, so therefore you will often find that bulk infrastructure provision, top structures are, coming to a condition where it's actually not safe. Okay, so you actually need to address that. Firstly, so that you can maintain operations. Secondly, of course, it is also important, if we want to attract and expand the industrial base in South Africa, we should utilize the infrastructure that we have. So a good place to start, therefore, is to look at the industrial parks and make them friendly to additional companies that can come in. And in that way, of course, we also ensure that, employment can be continued at a local level. As you know, COVID obviously has had a big impact on employment levels in the country. And it's quite important for us also, and as I mentioned earlier, this program has been running even prior to COVID. But it's quite important that we sustain and retain those jobs that we have, and then on the back of that we expand it. There are a number of other initiatives that we're trying to introduce simply because of the limitations in the fiscus in terms of, physical, financial resources that we can add in support of the industrial parks. So we've embarked on programs such as the Eco-Industrial Park program, for example, which really is related very closely to what we're discussing today. It basically looks at, all the various aspects of what an eco-industrial park is. So we're looking at a program that will transition industrial parks to eco-industrial parks. Okay. The reason why we do that is because we can then involve the likes of UNIDO, SECO, GIZ, the World Bank, the IFC, a number of other players in South Africa, to actually contribute in this space, which is something that we can't do ourselves. Okay. There are other programs that we're looking at. We're trying to introduce fourth industrial revolution technologies and solutions. That is still in its very early stages, so we don't really have a structured program around that, but that is something that is important. And we're also trying to introduce much stronger relationships in terms of research, development, and innovation in the industrial parks, which, as you may know, traditionally in South Africa has not received sufficient attention. There's a number of small activities, but I think, I'll stay with that. I think that should give everyone a fair idea of, the kind of activities that we have.
Thanks very much, Bernd. I think that gives us an excellent overview of what you guys are working on and where it fits into the broader economic development. I've got a few questions for you, which I'll save till later. Let's now go across to Klaus Turco, who is the Chief Technical Advisor, Global Eco-Industrial Parks Program in UNIDO. Klaus is working on these issues at UNIDO and is looking at how to advance the uptake of eco-industrial park practices and creating a conducive environment for eco-industrial parks policies. Klaus has served previously as a division chief at UNIDO and as a policy advisory role at UNDP and the European Commission. Klaus started his career in the manufacturing industry and has also served as a consultant in more than 20 countries. Klaus has a postgraduate degree in engineering, environmental policy, and business administration from his native Finland, Belgium, and UK, respectively. So he's got a number of qualifications and has been working actively in these areas. Over to you, Klaus, for your insights.
Well, thank you very much. And I think your introduction was great, and thank you, Bernd, also to putting it into the programs and the context of South Africa. I think those experiences can be really expanded also to internationally. I think it has been shown that industrial parks are a very good way of advancing industrialization and manufacturing in the countries. This has happened across historically across countries, across continents, and there are a number of things which are happening there in industrial parks. One is that you can provide some services there centralized. You can secure some services there. You can this way also attract good companies create employment, provide a secure place to work. And that is then sort of in a way growing into some sort of an organism by itself, right? It's been, sometimes I've been sort of thinking about the industrial parks as a sort of like you would like to develop any housing for people. What you want to do is you want to provide a good infrastructure, a good service around that will then make it attractive for maybe people with a vision to move in. Maybe they have a little bit better, and then they will then demand more services. They will start cooperating with each other, and I think that everybody sees a sort of a benefit of that. So it's really a vicious not a vicious circle, but a circle which is beneficial for everybody. And there's another point, as we are in the COVID era as well. I think one point which we've been thinking about a little bit, how to also, we have the good news now that there is a vaccine coming. It will take some time for it to be rolled out and all that. That will mean that there will be a gradual sort of easing of restrictions, gradual easing of movement, of social distancing, and so on. And in such a place like an industrial park, you can actually do this in a little bit more confined, controlled manner. You can ensure with the access, with how many people you are bringing in, what is the sort of the interactions with the delivery and other logistics. You can try to open this up in a sort of a controlled, regulated way, and I think that is something. Some of these things that also may enable industrial parks to serve in this peculiar time some lessons and some ways of being controlling in a controlled way, opening the society. So that's maybe something to throw in there for the policymakers who are now looking into what to do in the coming months, in the coming year, when we can hopefully ease all these restrictions. What we've done at UNIDO for many years is been helping countries to develop industrial parks, industrial areas, economic zones of different types. Really going in, looking at both at the sort of, does it make sense to have an industrial park? Is the companies there? Is there a business? Is there a taking up? What would be the type of sectors one would like to attract to such an industrial park? What are the while we are not maybe directly trying to pick winners, we are trying to avoid losers, if you want, in a way, saying that perhaps that typical area, that typical sector is very competitive out there. It might be difficult to attract at least international customers. These type of things we might be doing. We have done some of that work, but I think that what we have now trying to start to concentrate on is really to see how industrial parks can be something a little bit bigger than just a park for industries. How does it then interact with society? What are the sort of the other types of benefits that one can draw from there? One benefit is definitely this co-location, sharing of services, possibilities for SMEs and for all the companies to come in together and find business partners, finding ways of facilitating that, having meetings. The park management can take a very active role in that. Provide even better services. Bernd was telling of the fourth industrial revolution, and there is a number of IT, digitization type of services that is even beyond for some of the bigger companies. So here the parks can really be providing some of that. But in addition to that, what we are looking into in the eco-industrial parks framework is also the social, the social performance, also economic performance to some extent, and encouraging that there is a interaction between the community outside and the park. So the park would be and should be something more than just a number of companies which are sort of put aside somewhere. But that said, then it really requires that there is an uptake on the other side, because of course the park management and the companies, their decision making doesn't go beyond their own borders. They can only share information. They can only be actively offering a hand of cooperation, but it will be difficult for them, of course, to make decisions outside of the park. Might be an opportunity to talk more about the eco-industrial framework in general. Might come back to that topic if you want. Just to note that it really looks at four main categories of activities. One is really to strengthening the park management. And the next one is looking at the sustainability aspects when it comes to risks and environmental performance. All of these are very, very important, especially in South Africa, where you would be, unfortunately, with all of us rest in the world, also seeing the consequences of climate change, which will also be affecting a lot on the water availability, scarcity issues. And here industry has a very big role to play. Then, in addition to that, we are looking into the social dimension, where it's really about, as its easiest part is really to ensure that there are social infrastructure there, that it takes also into consideration of the gender needs. But also that there is a way of expressing one's grievances and this type of things in a park context, that everybody, the workers and everybody will have their voice heard. The final part is really to see that there is real benefits from an economic point of view, also from the parks, that it doesn't become like a detached part which we see somewhere in the world, where it's a sort of seems to be more of a fly-by-night operation, if you want, in a way that it is a park which is set up somewhere in the middle or somewhere where you then bring in the workforce from somewhere else, and then it might make a lot of business sense in the short term, but it might not be the sort of the development that countries would like to see going forward. Maybe I'll pass with those words the baton back to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Klaus. Full overview of that work. And I think what's important in what you're saying is that it's more than just the premises. It's an integrated support structure and something that is linked to communities. And I think that's a key differentiator. When we're thinking about how do industrial parks support enterprise. So I'd like to pick up on those discussions a bit later. Let me then move across to our next speaker, and that is Henry Nwarinda, and he's a project manager from the National Cleaner Production Centre, South Africa. Henry is a passionate and experienced person who's worked in the waste sector, industrial waste management, and in the circular economy. He's worked successfully in managing the setup of the Industrial Symbiosis Project that is now a national program and is a very important program that offers many benefits. Henry is currently leading the Global Eco-Industrial Parks Program that aims to assess and promote the transition of industrial parks to eco-industrial parks. Thanks, Henry. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Shaul, and good day to everyone. All right, getting back to the topic, is this industrial parks, is this a model for sustainable and economically sound industrial development? Looking at that and looking at what a clear definition or a simple definition of what industrial park is, commonly defined as a specific section of an area that is set aside and planned and zoned for the purposes of industrial development. The major drivers for setting up such industrial parks is to enhance dedicated concentration of infrastructure in an area or in a zoned area, so as to provide specific services to businesses that are located in an industrial park that would have been otherwise hard for an individual setup industry to achieve or to attain in terms of its production process. And such provisional infrastructures do help industries to, manufacture and produce efficiently, which eventually taps into the economies of scale and also reduces on the environmental impacts of industrial waste and any other associated negative impacts. So industrial parks that are set up in a particular location would traditionally be apart or located together. And at the end of the day, if you have them put aside and they're not in a particular location, it is hard to get to understand and to get to manage them properly. And that becomes a challenge for whoever it is, whether it is the legislator or whether it is whoever manages them. Putting them together enhances that kind of collaboration, cooperation towards achieving particular common goals. And yes, industrial park, if well planned and properly managed, is quite a relevant model for sustainable industrial and economically sound industrial development, because if set up and economically optimally functioning, they have the potential to attract investors in the industrial park. They encourage the use of resources efficiently, and they promote the production of goods and services efficiently. And down the line, they promote the creation and retention of jobs. And what is also important to note is that industrial parks are particularly supportive of SMMEs, since the sizes of SMMEs often inhibit them from using effective pollution control technologies. So locating SMMEs in industrial parks gives a regulator the possibility to control their pollution, a task that would otherwise be quite difficult to manage when they are located wide apart. And what is also important to note is that with the current challenges of economic development and the drive toward the sustainable industrial development, different organizations and governments are already looking at how industrial parks, as Klaus mentioned, they are looking at how industrial parks can transit to eco-industrial parks as a conducive framework that promotes both sustainable industrial growth and sustainable development goals. So with industrial parks, if well, as I mentioned, if well set up, they enhance competitiveness of companies in an industrial park. They promote collaboration of companies through the exchange of tangible and intangible resources. They also increase competitiveness of companies in an industrial park, mainly through the reduction of costs, e.g. the usage of resources. And increasing profitability as well comes along with that. And down the line, if well managed, these industrial parks, industries set up in industrial park, they work towards improving and enhancing their company image in terms of fulfilling the social corporate responsibilities, because there is a proper setup where they can operate and achieve that easily. Going further, one can say that industrial parks also promote industrial development where they foster the innovation and they encourage the application of and development of new technologies and innovative concepts, which could be of value for a country's economic growth. And if I would also say that industrial parks, if properly managed, they offer an opportunity to address the 3 dimensions of sustainable development, which are social equity, economic growth, and environmental protection. And this is in line with the Sustainable Development Goal number 9. If I was to just summarize what I've said and maybe conclude with some few parting shots, there are key important factors that we need to look at in terms of successful industrial park model. One would be, as Klaus and Ben said above, the supportive national policy and long-term government commitment, which together create an attractive environment for the business sector. Then a strong association of actors from private, public, and financial sectors is also very required to ensure investment and a coherent business approach to the companies residing in the industrial park. And maybe industrial parks are set up differently. So a viable planning and operational business model for each park is very important. And this is what we've been finding as we engage and discuss with UNIDO on how to roll out eco-industrial park concept in South Africa. And then a socially inclusive and forward-looking management model of industrial parks that is based on a dialogue between multiple parties, multiple stakeholders is very critical. And maybe in conclusion, the last point anyway, I've been concluding all along, an emphasis can be put on specific parks depending on their setup. For example, an eco-industrial park or specific special economic zones, or whatever you may call them, depending on the requirements of the respective industrial parks, requirements of government requirements, and requirements of specific stakeholders. So with those, let me just part off and hand you back the mic. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Henry. I think that gives us a lot of useful information on, I think, quite a different approach to how we think through industrial parks. It's starting to say there's a role for private players, there's a role to get the collaboration to the point where it actually starts making sense for the firms to reduce waste, improve their profitability, maybe even collaborate on accessing new opportunities. So I think it's taking us in a very positive direction, this type of thinking. I would now like to hand over to Lesego, and let me introduce her quickly. Lesego Serolong Holtzapel is the Chief Executive Officer of Bokamoso Impact Investments. Lesego is a 2019 Tutu Fellow. She was listed in the Mail and Guardian 200 South Africans and a Standard Bank Top Woman of the Year award, and received the Trailblazer Presidential Awards. She's the CEO and founder of Bokamoso Impact Investments. She has a Master's of Science in Social Policy and Development from the London School of Economics, and together with her husband founded Raise the Children in 2008. Lesego is passionate about agriculture and African leadership, and as a core part as part of a core entrepreneurial drivers that she speaks and teaches about. She describes herself as mission-driven, a risk-taker, and compassionate. Lesego, I'm interested to hear what you have to say. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Saul, for that. So I'm going to wear 2 hats today. I'm going to wear my entrepreneur hat, and I'm also going to wear my, policy analyst hat. And so one of the companies that was not mentioned there is Bokamoso Foods, which is our food manufacturing and processing company. So with Bokamoso Impact Investments, what we started looking at was opportunities that are in the agri sector, because, given the amount of money that South Africa spends, importing food from other countries, and also obviously we are exporting a lot of food, we saw that there's certainly like a gap in the market. And then we have obviously like a social problem of people migrating from rural areas to the cities, Cape Town, Durban, Johannesburg. For obvious reasons, people are hungry. Our job statistics aren't looking great, and so it's really hard, really, to encourage people not to move, to migrate to the cities when there's actually nothing happening in terms of like economic activity in the community. So, after graduating from the LSE and working with, few social enterprises in India, I think I really had the desire to return back to South Africa and really start researching the agri sector, specifically like in rural areas. And we know that in rural areas, most of the land is owned by, the chiefs. It's communal land. So, which it's good because it's almost like free land, but also it's problematic in that you can't really get title deed to that land. And especially if you're trying to scale as a farmer in the rural area, if you're going to financiers, the big thing that they look at is obviously like a title deed, some form of security in a form of assets, which, there's a mismatch in terms of like, what traditional financiers like the banks would look for versus what a small farmer in a rural area would have. And so these are some of the things that we've been researching about, from 2015, and we actually decided to launch an agri hub in the Kalahari in the Northwest Province. And one of the reasons for launching also, before we even launched, we actually decided to do community engagement, which is very, very important. And I think sometimes we miss the voice of the community when it comes to like decision making, especially also from the policy heads. I told you that I'll be wearing multiple hats in this call. It's so important that, we engage with people, from the bottom of the pyramid and actually try to figure out what is a challenge, and actually allow them, empower them to actually come up with solution, and we can come alongside them and support them. So we did several like town hall meetings, and our approach was like bottom up, where we actually allowed the community to tell us, which area do they see interesting, but also area that provides opportunity. So in that particular area, people have livestock, they farm, but it's on a very small scale. So we just also started engaging with the private sector. I think Henry mentioned that earlier, that it's so critical that, to do anything job creation wise in South Africa, it's critical that all the parties come together. The public sector can't do it on their own. They're there to run a government. The private sector, they're there to also collaborate with the customers, because they obviously can't do much without their customers, as well as the state as well. So we started, bringing in, different actors, like the ARC, to provide like research on the ground and really help our farmers find like cultivars that would be drought resistant, because we're obviously working in an arid, dry land. We've also been spending time, meeting with different companies and going to different sites, like in Israel, for example, because it's similar climate, similar region, and it's just been very interesting. And I like bringing the Israel example, in that, you find that Israel is like the size of Kruger National Park, and half of it, it's like desert. Yet they've been able to like, scale the agriculture in a way that's very, very impressive. They're exporting. So you contrast obviously to like South Africa, rural areas in particular. We have land, some parts we have water, but why is it that our entrepreneurs aren't growing at the scale that we would like to see? And obviously our entrepreneurs growing means that you obviously are creating jobs, the necessary jobs that would not to make them to move to Johannesburg. So we built this incubator, and we brought in different parties, and also we brought in the chiefs, because they are obviously like the regulators of the land, the custodians of the land. So our arrangement with them was, once they've trained, once our entrepreneurs have gone through the 6 months, intensive incubation program, the chiefs would then allocate them land. And so the chiefs, were allocating land, but the problem, however, was access to market, because you're in a rural area, you are pretty much, your options are few in terms of like either going to your local tuck shops or grocery stores. That, you know, the closest town is like 2 hours away, or actually adding value. So that's when I started, you know, to come up with Bokamoso Impact and Bokamoso Foods, which is a platform that provides an opportunities for farmers to trade that products. So some of our products include moringa, we do honey. Even with the honey, we actually also participate in the entire value chain. We manufacture, you know, beehives, because we realize that there aren't many beehive manufacturers in the country. The country obviously is importing, you know, a lot of the honey, you know, from Asia and other countries. So we saw that there was a gap, because our farmers are growing vegetables, and you need bees, you know, to like pollinate, and obviously South Africa, we obviously are experiencing a decline of honeybees as well. And so that's how I think, you know, from the Bokamoso Foods perspective, we were able to like grow and see opportunities for value add. And obviously as a social entrepreneur, my heart is always sustainable job creation, right? In the process. So our factory was actually based in Gauteng, and we decided to move during COVID, believe it or not, to a rural area, because we just felt like we can't really preach something that, you know, say something that we don't preach, you know, ourselves, like act the other way. So we decided to move all our operation to Daung, to the rural areas. You know, we run a 24-hour shift. You know, we package different, you know, beverages, hot and cold beverages. We also package different food products. We also have moved our beehive manufacturing here as a result of being able to create 30 jobs in a village. And for them, you know, for locals, it's such a huge thing, because when you go to a rural area, you don't think about a factory. You know, I wish I could actually turn my camera, because I'm like facing the factory like directly in front of me. The fact that they can actually walk to work instead of taking 10 taxis, you know, to get to work, which eats up the salaries. And so when it comes to like industrialization, and I mean, even being here and being able to, you know, focus on the different segments of our business, you know, the manufacturing of beverages, the packaging of honey, and telling the story of the South African honey, you know, to the consumer, and also manufacturing the beehives. It's so huge in that, you know, you realize that we could be doing this in 10 other locations if we actually had the infrastructure, right? So we obviously had to invest in our infrastructure alongside with Barloworld, which we are very, very grateful for. So in terms of like, you know, creating these industrial parks, it's very, very critical, especially for young entrepreneurs, because not only are SMEs faced with the challenge of access to capital, capacity building is also critical. And I think Henry mentioned that as well, and Bernd as well, that, you know, our young entrepreneurs in townships and rural areas, they may not know what are the export requirements, you know, for their different products. They've never been taken through a course. So I think coupled with providing infrastructure, it's so critical that we provide capacity building. They actually come together and understand what are the financiers looking for, so that they would be considered bankable as well. Because a lot of, you know, entrepreneurs like SMEs, they bootstrap, right? So if they're not going to qualify for a loan at X bank, they're going to go to Uncle so-and-so and get, you know, 100 Rand to start. Obviously, when that person starts, they're not going to have a banking profile. So when the IDC is looking to fund someone, they want financials. That person has no idea what financials look like. That person may not even be in a position to have like tax clearance certificates. So I think also, you know, coming back to public-private partnership, it's so critical that, you know, as much as we are establishing infrastructure, you know, the industrial parks, that we bring in all these components that would create an ecosystem of growth for our young entrepreneurs. I mean, even having, you know, a factory here, I literally every day people are like coming in and out, like asking if we have like factory space for them to produce whatever. So these are some of the opportunities that, you know, we see in terms of like enabling young people, or where we see industrial park enabling young people to like create jobs. It's not that young people are lazy or they don't want to work hard. It's just that we don't have the right tools. I mean, in our case, the best thing that we actually dispatch all our products like all over South Africa. You know, we work Monday to Friday. We have courier services. We also have our own trucks. but I think it would have been better if, because we're not far from the rail line, if we could actually get our act together to make sure that we also capitalize on like rail system in terms of like dispatching products across South Africa. The roads obviously are good where we are, but I think it's those basic things that would enable us to thrive as SMEs, because we do see opportunities. And also, last point, where we are, it's like the pecan heart of South Africa. We are actually in a village called Taung. We are between Kimberley and Freiburg. So there's a lot of like pecan package, or, you know, pecan South Africa is here, olive South Africa is also here. So we also see that if there was an industrial park here, there could be great opportunity in the value add space in terms of like, you know, turning, you know, pecans to oil or whatever, like different products, literally from like logistics to whatever. So I think it's going to require all of us to come together, and entrepreneurs and SMEs need to be in that room. And I think, even as policymakers and government officials, we need to remember that, you know, SMEs are the bedrock of any society and every economy. They are embedded, you know, in communities. They know what's happening. So
Thanks.
It's critical
Okay.
that we come
Great.
together. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much, Lesego. I think if we gave you the whole day, you would be able to keep talking. So let me cut in there. And I think what you've shared with us is not only your passion, which you certainly described in your intro, but also that you put your money where your mouth is. You've taken your factory, you've moved your operations to a rural area, and you're living what you've been preaching, which is excellent. I mean, it's not everyone who's prepared to do that and to take the risks on doing that, and to create jobs in rural areas is really what we need in South Africa, and to support the startups that you've spoken about, and new opportunities that are coming out of your own enterprise. I've got a few questions that I'd like to put to the panel. The whole panel doesn't need to respond. We can have 2 or 3 responses. But one of the things that I'd like to raise, and it's coming from something that Bernd had said and Lesego had said, is to what extent are we looking at industrial parks that focus on new enterprises versus industrial parks that are focusing on existing enterprises, or getting existing enterprises relocating into industrial parks? I mean, how easy is it to start a new enterprise and immediately start paying rent, going to, setting up in a park, and all of those things? Can we get some insights from our panel as to where are we pitching these industrial parks? Klaus, do you want to go first? You look like you're ready to speak.
Maybe I look at not so much, because I think it might be better to have it in the South African context, and there perhaps Bernd or Henry would be, because this is a little bit different depending on where you're looking at. So I know that there are big industrial parks around, say, mining operations, this type of things, also in South Africa. On the other hand, some of these are very, very diverse and in the regions. Some of them are sectoral and all this. But perhaps Bernd is the better one to speak on this point in the local context.
Okay, Bernd, over to you.
Thanks, Klaus. I think I needed an intro. Look, yeah, like I said earlier, every area is different, first of all. Okay, so sometimes people think an industrial park, just because we're doing an industrial park program or an SEZ program, we must have an industrial park or an SEZ. It is not always the best answer for that particular area. And I just want to give some context here. Internationally, governments and industry all over the world are moving away from the traditional industrial area, where people have to travel to, sometimes over large distances, okay, to go and work. Okay, so we're moving back, and especially in an eco-friendly environment, we're moving back to developing spaces where there's industrial activity, but people actually live very close by. And that's, I became very excited when I heard what Lesego was saying, because that's actually what we want to get back to. People walking to work or cycling to work instead of taking a bus that takes you an hour or 2 hours. Okay, I mean, there are people in South Africa that live like that every single day. Okay, I'm not even talking about people living in Joburg or in Cape Town, or Pretoria, who drive an hour and a half, 2 hours in traffic. Okay, so that's the international context. So we would like to see that industrial parks long term actually move towards that kind of redesign of spaces. Okay, I think it's important to understand that context. In terms of setting up a business, whether it's in an industrial park or not so easy always as it would seem. Okay, unfortunately, South Africa has not been doing so well over the last couple of years. Well, in fact, almost a decade now, where we've slipped in our World Bank index of ease of doing business. Okay, so we're actually not doing so well. So that makes it harder for a company to actually set up business. But that being said, government has been trying to do a whole range of initiatives and interventions to actually change this around. Okay, one-stop shops, for example, is one example. Okay, there are other mechanisms that we're trying to build into industrial parks, which comes back to what I think Henry and Klaus mentioned, is where you have shared services. Okay, Lesego also almost implied that. You know, we would like to see industrial parks not as an industrial space per se, but where people can come. If you want to set up a business, you come there, there's support there, you can find people that will help you jump through all the different hoops, you know, opening up a bank account, getting registered with SARS. You know, that's just mentioning some of the basics. I mean, there's a whole range of things that you need to go through if you want to set up a business, okay? And then we're not even talking about your product and the development of your product or your service, whatever that is. So the kind of model we're trying to move towards, which again is something that's happening quite significantly internationally, and what makes a number of industrial spaces internationally that more competitive, is providing that kind of service to those kind of businesses, whether they're inside the park or outside. Okay, yes, just maybe a brief classification in South Africa. So SEZs, special economic zones, have a special regulatory framework that applies to them, whereas industrial parks don't have yet. Okay, so we are working on that, but we're not there yet. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to differentiate companies in an industrial park at the moment through introducing services such as resource efficiency and cleaner production services, okay, business support services, intellectual property and trademarking, you know, and, you know, those related types of services, marketing services, looking at shared facilities where, let's say you are coding an app, maybe you need Xcode, you know, if you do it on the iPhone, or if you know, and there's all kinds of different software suites, you know, you need some support with that, or you need access to some developers somewhere. So we've introduced what is part of the Presidential Digital Hub program, where we're setting up digital hubs in each of the industrial parks in the country. Okay, we're also trying to link these to some of the ECZs at least. So the great thing is that, you know, if you can start providing all these services, you should, in principle, make it easier for these businesses to set up. I think I'll stop there. I think it, you know, gives you a good idea of where we're trying to go to.
Okay, thanks. I think that's very useful. Henry, do you have anything to add to that, or you covered by what Bernd said?
Actually, Ben covered a big chunk of it. I'll pass.
Okay, thanks. Let me move on to another question that I have. We don't have huge amounts of time for this discussion, so I'm going to move on to the next question. And that's really around something that seems to be emerging from this discussion is a private and a public model. So, you know, we've got private industrial parks, we've got government established industrial parks, and what seems to be coming through is that maybe there's a role for entrepreneurs to get involved in helping to run the government ones by providing services, almost incubation type services by the sounds of it, and a way to support entrepreneurs and you know, existing businesses with business support services in a way that's sustainable, because they're selling their services almost as an enterprise. So we're seeing something emerging there. So I'd like to get some views on this hybrid model that's emerging, and what's the views of the panel on that?
Maybe I can start off with that. I think that actually what we do, I'm a part of a program which is now active in 7 countries, and also looking into data from other countries in addition to that. What we've been seeing very clearly when we try to benchmark parks, we see that actually private sector and public-private partnership parks are at least against the international eco-industrial park framework, is scoring higher, which somehow I think that the indication is there, is that if you have a park which runs like, it's run like a business, it is more efficient, it's providing better and more service. That said, then I think that the question there is that what is the role of the public sector there, and what are those additional support structures that the public sector could perhaps buy from a private operator of the park? And those are the type of things that Bernd was discussing, what Leseo was discussing, is that how to help entrepreneurs to start. I mean, this business incubator part, I mean, the space and all these sort of things, I mean, shared lab services, shared infrastructure, all these sort of things can be provided by the park for a payment, for a fee, right? But it requires some base need and base utilization. The same goes for these business one-stop shops, or having your customs there, or having proper logistics operations from there. If there would be a public buyer who would be saying that, well, I'm going to buy, say, 20 business incubator training mentoring services from this park management this year, then it would be then worthwhile to ensure for the park management that this business is up and running. And that's where your entrepreneurs could come in. They could get the mentoring, they could get but that's more like an incubator type of work. But what I see there is that there's a role for the public sector to perhaps in some cases to set up infrastructure. But after that, it could be a sort of somehow a buyer of services that is proving that would be valuable for the wider employment and maybe the wider social and environmental type of service and role that industrial parks could have.
Thanks. Lesego, as an entrepreneur, what is your view on that? Do you think there's opportunities here to come in and to provide these services, or even to establish an industrial park in your area with the support of government? And how would you see these developments?
No, I just to echo the words of Klaus now, I think it's so critical that, we actually have these entrepreneurs have these services in industrial parks, in communities, because they really determine our growth and scale, as small businesses. So I think sometimes we feel like government has put in a lot of red tapes for us, that really choke our growth. So actually, government stepping in and providing an ecosystem of growth and support, I think we will start seeing a lot of innovation, coming out of these areas. We will start, exporting technology and all sorts of good things. So I think it's critical that they come to the party.
Great, thank you. Henry, over to you.
Yeah, just to support what Leseo and Klaus just mentioned above, with SMMEs being set up in an industrial park, it is very critical that when you have to move towards the applications of circular economy, you need SMMEs to be set up in those industrial parks with whatever support can be there, so that they can be used, or they can help in the circulation of resources in an industrial park, instead of letting some of these particular, like waste, going outside the industrial park, whereas it can be used in there. Cases in point where we have the East London IDZ, where you have Clarita as a plastic pelletization plant or a plastic recycling plant that looks at the entire waste that is generated in the East London IDZ to stay in the industrial park, to be reused there and produce some specific resources. And that can be done in other industrial parks up and down in the country. And that is where that's a space where SMMEs can play and participate efficiently with any support that could come from whoever it could be. Thank you.
Thanks, Henry. Just my last question, because we are coming to the end of our, but because we've got a whole lot of private parks or private parks where industry are located. You know, I come from Durban, and you go out to Pinetown, and all along the way you see all of these private parks. And I'm sure in Ekurhuleni we've got a similar thing happening, where you've got lots of these co-located enterprises. And is there an opportunity to do what Henry is saying? You know, can we bring in these industrial symbiosis projects or opportunities, or even the incubation type services into these private players who are, you know, they've just bought a couple of factory units, they've set up a park, they've attracted some industry, they're not necessarily connected firms. Firms just happen to locate there. Is there an opportunity to bring this public-private model that we've spoken about into the private space and privately owned industrial parks? I don't know who wants to talk to that issue. Bernd?
Yeah, Saul, I would love to give my 2 cents worth on that. Look, I believe we are nowadays dealing with issues that are way too complex for any one particular partner to handle anymore. Okay, so if anyone still wants to think that, you know, whether it's private sector or public sector, going to get away with trying to deal with things all by themselves, they are sadly mistaken. Okay, I think that's just a categorical statement I want to make. In terms of the model, it would be fantastic if we can get every single industrial estate in the country as part of a larger forum or network, okay, because that would provide us the economies of scale to provide these kind of partnerships-based services to, you know, industrial estates all over the country. And I'm including here SEZs, industrial parks, you know, sometimes even just industrially zoned areas all over the country. Yes, I think there's huge potential there. And so far, I must be honest, I've identified a whole and come across a whole range of different companies and institutions that are actually keen to work together. And I think if we work together, you know, in the spirit of, look, let's see what we can do, make the best of this, pull together in the same direction, I think we can have a massive impact. Thank you.
Sounds very positive. Henry, over to you.
Just as Ben mentioned, just to quickly reiterate, with the global eco-industrial park that we are running in the country now, with Ben's directions and close, the emphasis has been with the parks we have selected. Can we bring in private industrial parks into the program? And yes, that is where we are going. And I wish this message can get out closer, that they get on board and we work collaboratively with them as an ecosystem. And I think with that, we should be able to have huge, huge, huge benefits. Thank you.
Excellent. Lesego, anything to add on this topic?
Yeah, I think, you know, efficiency and being able to monitor, you know, KPIs is very, very critical. So I think actually having, you know, having the public and the private sector come together, but having the private sector lead some of that, I think it will be critical in terms of like us being able to like achieve our goals and also being more accountable, which I think, you know, sometimes the private sector or the public sector can be a little bit sticky, but I think in terms of like efficiency and job creation, we need to have you know, we need to have people that knows how to run things in the forefront.
Good. Thanks very much, Klaus. Any last words from you? You can have the last word of the session.
No, I just want to thank for the very inspiring discussion from my part, and thank you for all the views and I hope it also inspires continuation of the discussion during the session and the questions and answers.
Okay, thanks very much to our panelists, and we're going to then hand over to the audience to see if there are any questions. There's the group chat that you're welcome to write the questions on, and we can then have some discussion that way. Also, our panelists, I've introduced them. Their profiles are in the information brochure. You're probably welcome to contact them directly if you want to get involved in these programs, and also to contact Lesego if you're interested in some of the work that she's doing. I'm particularly interested in the beehives. I think it's an amazing and exciting project and holds huge opportunity for some of the other work that we're looking at. So I might be contacting you on that. But yes, any questions in the group chat, and we'll over to you, to the audience to give your feedback and inputs. Thanks very much.